Good afternoon, friends, and thank you for joining us. I am Bob Gutman, co-chair of the Voice for Israel, a 10-year-old source of education for North Carolina, centered in the Triangle area of our state. Today, we are blessed with the opportunity to converse with Dr. Robert Friedman about community policing, police leadership training, and the principles of his very popular program providing international exchange of strategic principles. You are on mute. That means that we want you to ask questions, but please use the Q&A button. Your question will be read only by a member of our board, and that member will pass that question to Dr. Friedman at the end of our brief discussion. Dr. Friedman is Professor Emeritus at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at Georgia State University in Atlanta. There he founded the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, known popularly as GELI. His program trained to great acclaim 3 current police chiefs in North Carolina and in many other states. They are in Durham, Raleigh, and Fayetteville. GELI's mission is to train leaders based on principles of on-site peer-to-peer interchange in order to enhance community capabilities to manage public safety. He is the author of dozens of articles in this field and has served on many related advisory boards. And presently he serves on the Federal Commission on Law Enforcement and Justice. Dr. Friedman, a very hearty welcome to you. We really appreciate your spending your valuable time with us. I'm going to start by asking you a question based on my visit. When I had a chance to talk to you and visit you and your amazing team at the Andrew Young School at Georgia State University, you told me that you view yourself now as a criminologist. Please tell us more about that and why that constitutes an academic career.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gutman. I'm glad to be with you and glad to have the viewers on. So I would also like to thank everyone at Voice for Israel for your efforts to put together this webinar and for your strong and dedicated pro-Israel stand. You asked about my career. Well, frankly, I never thought about being a criminologist in terms of having an academic career. I'm not even sure I intended to have this career. Criminology is a science that focuses on understanding why people commit crime. Yet early on, I was curious as to why people do not commit crime. After all, these are choices that we make as individuals. So intellectual and scientific curiosity has been my driving force. After 50 years as an academic, I still believe that to develop a good understanding of human behavior, it is important to focus not only on criminal behavior, but also on law-abiding behavior. This way, we can develop a better understanding of both. My curiosity was apparent enough to my professors who urged me to pursue graduate studies, and I ended up at the University of Minnesota, where I obtained my PhD in sociology in 1978. At that time, I wanted to put what I have learned into action. I've always been inspired by Auguste Comte, the 19th century French philosopher of science, who stated, and let me translate freely from the French, know in order to predict, predict in order to formulate policy. In other words, it is not merely knowledge for knowledge's sake, but knowledge that is used to improve humanity. After graduation, I returned to Israel, and after working in a public research institute and a private company, I ended up disappointed in both. The first cut corners on financial integrity and the second on scientific integrity. Both had low professional standards. So when I received an offer to join the faculty at the University of Haifa, I accepted. There I conducted research, I taught, and I helped influence policing policy. Therefore, it was fairly coincidental that I ended up in a university and embarked on an academic career. I was at the University of Haifa for 6 years, and in the early 1980s, I led a series of field experimental studies on community policing that made the Israel police among the first in the world to have developed community policing. Let me add that community policing is the latest and most important development in the policing movement. After spending a sabbatical at the University of Minnesota in 1985-86, I joined the faculty at Georgia State University in Atlanta, where I had the opportunity to flourish professionally. I served as department chair for 13 years and held a distinguished chair in public safety partnerships. In addition to my role in the university, I was fortunate to serve on several Blue Ribbon commissions, and let me mention just a few. In 1996, it was the Olympic Park bombing investigation in Atlanta. Then the state of Georgia Crime Laboratory needs in 98 and again in 2010, which ended up allocating more than $60 million to the state crime lab. The commission to use on using the electronic weapons or tasers in 2004 and 5. The Fulton County Courthouse shooting in 2005. Policies on police pursuit in 2005 and 6. And then the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice that you mentioned, Bob, in 2020. And this is as a subject matter expert to the Homeland Security Group, one of 15 groups on the commission. I received several large grants and published numerous articles, books, and research reports. So I can say that I have certainly had an academic career as a criminologist, and I'm very proud of it. In retrospect, this is exactly what I wanted to do when I grow up. Bob?
I thought you were going to show us something.
No.
All right, here's my next question. Based on your research, your long experience, and your concerns for public safety, you have taught to many people the essentials of developing a robust community policing practice and taught to many leaders in our communities and others. I'd like for you to outline your experiences and tell us about the basic features of education which deal with those issues. And tell us how those needs influence the development of your program.
Thank you, Bob. So I mentioned earlier that I'm interested in formulating public policies. Many in democratic and non-democratic societies alike believe in crime control as a sole responsibility of the police. In my work, I went beyond that axiom or assumption. But before that, maybe a word on the origin of policing. When you ask people about the origins of policing, they usually go back to Sir Robert Peel, the 19th century two-time British Prime Minister, who is regarded as the father of modern policing. If you dig further, some will trace it to the Norman period in the 11th century and the Shire Reeve, a role from which the modern sheriff has emerged. However, the first mention of police that I'm aware of is actually in Deuteronomy 16:18. Judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates. In Hebrew, it actually states shotrim, or specifically police officers, not merely officers. For our viewers in Israel, the verse is shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha. So why are the gates? Because all cities were walled, and the gates controlled access to and from the cities. This way, the justice system dealt with criminals at the gate. For example, they handled farmers who cheated on the weight of the produce. So the ancient Hebrew police officer did not have a gun, a taser, handcuffs, radio, or even a body camera. Rather, he had weights to verify that the weights the vendor used did not cheat the customer. I understood early on that if police do not commit the crime, then expecting them to curb it is a task beyond their capabilities. A good analogy is from the medical field. Doctors do not cause illness. Let's illustrate this. Emergency rooms exist to treat acute medical problems such as heart attacks or COVID-19. Yet to treat the epidemiology of cardiovascular disease or viral infection, the solution is in the community, not in the emergency room. It is the same for crime. Police do not commit the crime. To deal with the epidemiology of crime, one needs to focus on crime causation or on criminogenic factors. In other words, don't leave police alone in the fight against crime. Or better yet, focus on producing less crime rather than having to deal with it after it is produced. It helps to look at crime as a product because this way we understand how we can produce less of it. Usually in industry, we want to produce more products. In public health, we want to produce less. Less disease equals more health. It is the same with crime. This is the difference between a reactive and a proactive model. Both are important, but they approach the problem differently. And of course, they complement each other. It is not an either-or situation. The same way that we wanted to flatten the curve for COVID-19, we want to flatten the caseload of criminal activity. In 1992, I published my book on community policing, which included the first definition of community policing in the literature. And what I would like to do is go with you through this definition, and let me share a screen and we can look at the slide. One quick second. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. So community policing is a policy and a strategy aimed at achieving more effective and efficient crime control, reduce fear of crime, improved quality of life, improved police services and police legitimacy through proactive reliance on community policing that seeks to change crime-causing conditions. And this is the key difference between this definition and any future definitions that came afterward. This assumes a need for greater accountability of police, greater public share in decision-making, and greater concern for civil rights and liberties. And since we're on this slide, I want to also give you our website because all of this information can be found on it and some other information that I'll make reference to it later on. All right, so. So this definition actually guides me in everything that I do in my professional work. First, I want to develop an understanding. Second, I want to formulate policy. Third, I want to become proactive. And fourth, develop partnerships. In October 2019, the International Association of Chiefs of Police adopted this definition as its policy. It made some very minor adjustments to it. The IACP is a 127-year-old professional association of police chiefs with 31,000 plus members from more than 150 countries. So it is certainly rewarding to see academic knowledge being transformed into policing policy.
Well, thank you, Robbie. And now, based on that, I'd like you to give us some examples of the achievements of Gili and the challenges it faces in pursuit of those goals. To illustrate, please tell us about your early warnings to the Atlanta police just before the 1996 Olympics and the terrible bombing attack at that time.
Well, thank you, Bob. This question actually touches directly upon the very reason for establishing Gili. In 1990, the president of the International Olympic Committee announced that Atlanta was selected to host the 1996 Olympic Games. I recall that moment as if it happened yesterday. It was 8 a.m. on September 18, 1990, when I was driving to campus and heard the announcement on the radio. I was elated to be in a city that would host the Centennial Olympic Games. But the elation quickly gave room for concern about having Munich 1972 repeat itself in Atlanta. Until that time, Atlanta had relatively little experience in hosting events of this large magnitudes. Not a lot of cities do. Think about millions of spectators, dozens of heads of state, thousands of athletes, all condensed into 2 intensive weeks with the eyes of the entire world on it. So I connected the Israel police and law enforcement agencies in Georgia. Israel provided a police expert on loan for a year to the State Olympic Law Enforcement Command. His work and contribution became a legend. I can state that it literally saved lives. On the Gili website, you can see a page about Olympic security support and the memorial to the victims of the Munich terror attack. 11 Israeli athletes and a German police officer were murdered. There's also an excellent documentary on the terror attack, which I highly recommend that you watch. Until 1996, participants from Georgia were limited to police leaders who had Olympic venue security responsibilities. The experience that we gained was very helpful to others, and we shared it with Utah for the 2002 Winter Olympic Games, London 2012 Summer Olympic Games, and Rio de Janeiro for the 2016 Summer Olympic Games. It was gratifying to see that they actually adopted our recommendations based on our experience and lesson learned. And indeed, the games were carried out successfully and remained safe without an incident. And I want to emphasize that this is not because there was any lack of trying. There were a lot of attempts at the Olympics in all of these cities. After '96, we opened Gili statewide and then nationally and internationally. Since '96, we have been focusing on law enforcement leadership development. After 28 years of program offerings, we have more than 1,800 graduates from more than 500 programs, and we provided special briefings to more than 34,000 law enforcement and corporate security personnel in 29 states and 26 countries. Gili is very proud to have 5 graduates from North Carolina, 3 of whom, as just mentioned, lead the Durham, Fayetteville, and Raleigh police departments. One element is particularly important to mention about the Atlanta efforts. In 1990, we started to review Jewish facilities, synagogues, schools, community centers, kindergartens, Federation building, as they have been targets of hate, extremism, terrorism, and violent attack. Our working assumption was that they were at risk. They were highly vulnerable soft targets. So we wanted to assess the level of threat, the level of preparedness, and the level of security needs. Out of that effort, Atlanta was the first to have developed its community security initiative, and it later evolved into the secure community networks of Jewish federations around the country. I can give you a very specific example that pertains to an event, not just a facility. In 1999, the GA, the General Assembly, met in Atlanta. This event attracted thousands of Jewish leaders for 3 days and carried with it a security risk. Gili was asked to assist with security planning, and it indeed helped secure the GA. We did the same for the Maccabi Games in Atlanta in 2001. Another example, the previous chief of the Atlanta Police Department was impressed with the Leadership Development Center of the Israel Police and with the Command and Control Center in the old city of Jerusalem. He wanted to have those in Atlanta, and the Atlanta Police Department now has them. The Durham Police Chief, C.J. Davis, was at the time Deputy Chief of the Atlanta Police. She trailblazed the development of the Atlanta Police Leadership Institute that is now in its 7th year. The Atlanta Police, inspired by the Israel Police, established its Video Integration Center for downtown cameras. About 3 or 4 years ago, the Israel Police was interested in learning about the Video Integration Center in Atlanta. When I told them that Atlanta was inspired by the Israel Police and why would they come to Atlanta, they said that they know, but they have only police cameras, and now they have a new project developing cameras that integrate public and private ones into the command center, and that's why they needed the Atlanta experience. So indeed, they came to Atlanta and several other cities and benefited greatly from the knowledge they acquired. Gili has numerous examples of police learning from police to improve the services to the public. That is what the exchange is about, and it is an achievement we're very proud of.
Very nice. Before we go on, I want to tell everybody that I have about 2 more questions, and that I hope that you will post your questions to our board member, who will pass them on to Dr. Friedman after we're finished. You will be the only one, you and the board member will be the only one who sees that question. Robbie, I know that your program has been attacked on your campus by groups who don't like Israel, many of whom also blame policing for abusive tactics. How do these protesters see a relationship between these 2 issues? We have seen this here in Durham, and we have seen this develop some anti-Semitic activities. Have you dealt with that in your life and campus?
Well, interestingly enough, Bob, for the first 17 years of the program, we never had any negative reference to the program whatsoever. For the last 11 years or so, we indeed have been attacked. And this is because we deal with police, and we deal, among others, with the Israel police. In the eyes of some groups, that is a cardinal sin. So a couple of pieces for background. In the US, there's a long history of selective enforcement, and while legal at some point in history, it resulted in gross abuse of power. Add to it excessive and at times flagrant use of force against minorities. So while anti-police sentiments may be understandable, there's an added element lately of an attempt to do away with police altogether. This is a movement known as Beyond Policing, and just try to imagine a city without police, and that's partly what I think some attempt in your city. The second element is that the hate of Jews is at least 2,000 years old, and the hate of modern Israel can be traced to the 66 years of the pre-state period, and then from 1948, when Israel was established, and all the way through this morning, and I'll give you a few examples in a minute. This is clearly anti-Semitic. So anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and anti-police groups are joining forces and attack anything that has the term police and Israel in it. In this case, we are just simply providing a convenient target. They use the platforms against police and against Israel to attack any police training in Israel, and they call it intersectionality. These attacks are in a large part a BDS initiative that is trying to destroy Israel by boycotts of all kinds. The BDS emerged post-Durban 2001 after the realization that they cannot win against Israel by wars. I want to make clear, absolutely clear, that criticism of police and criticism of Israel is not only acceptable, it is desirable as part of the discourse in any free and democratic society. Having said that, anti-Semitism is not acceptable. What is particularly alarming about this is not only the anti-police and anti-Israel sentiment or rhetoric. Actually, it is the vicious vitriol and incitement that uses the big lie technique. It is not only anti-Semitic, it is offensive to one's intelligence. Israel is blamed for things it does not do. The big lie technique is utilized to foment a blood libel against Israel and Jews and against the police. Saying that training in Israel is a deadly exchange is a blatant lie. Durham, North Carolina, of all places, knows it all too well since April 16, 2018. In this context, I want to recognize the strong support that my university, Georgia State University, offers Gilly. Through the years, we have received 4 university-wide awards of excellence. That happens because of the recognition of the value of the work that we do. I also truly appreciate the strong support we receive from the law enforcement community.
Well, thanks again. My last question is similar to one of the questions that's already posted, but I'll go ahead and ask it. Please tell us about the specific needs of the communities to deal with the vulnerability in growing anti-Semitism. For example, can temples and Jewish centers do something to protect themselves?
Well, the short answer is yes, but let me provide some background and context. So unfortunately, all these things didn't start this morning or last year. Jews have been targets for attacks for well over 2,000 years. And I want to be judicious and not give you the whole book, but start with exiles by the Romans, subjugation in feudal Europe, blood libels, forced conversions, inquisition, expulsion from Spain, England, and Portugal, crusades, pogroms, the Holocaust, and terrorism. Israel was not established because of the Holocaust and not because of anti-Semitism. The driving force was the disappointment from the Enlightenment and emancipation movements that were not equally applied to Jews. Case in point, the Dreyfus Affair in France, 1894 to 1906, framing a Jewish army captain for treason, this is what inspired Theodor Herzl to envision what he called the old new state of Israel. And this list continues to grow in modern times, and I'll provide just a very few examples. My advisor's colleague, who was accepted to Columbia University on a Jewish quota, he was among the few lucky ones. A former president of the Atlanta Jewish Federation, along with 20 other Jewish students, was flunked out of dental school at Emory University in the early 1950s because he's Jewish. In 2012, Emory University apologized. In April, a senior police officer in the Ukraine, April this year, okay, last month, a senior police officer in the Ukraine demanded the Jewish community provide complete data on all Jews, again, all Jews, including addresses, occupations, cell numbers, and the like. And the pretext was investigating organized crime. We have been experiencing bombs in synagogues, attacks on Jewish community centers, massacres in synagogues, and harassment of Jewish students on campus. The ADL reported that anti-Semitic incidents surged in 2019. It reported the same findings for 2018 and 2017. 2 days ago, the Supreme Leader of Iran posted an illustration in honor of Jerusalem Day about victory over Israel with the subtitle, "The Final Solution." This along the usual slogans of death to America and death to Israel. This morning, today, a massive hacking attack attributed to Iran, Hamas, and possibly Turkey penetrated at least 327 known websites with demands for ransom and with slides that state in bad English and bad Hebrew, and I'll quote just one, "Countdown of Israel destruction has begun since a long time." All this is not because of what we do, but because of who we are and how others define us. So I think it's important to note a classic verse in the Haggadah for Passover, which we recited a month ago. In each and every generation, they rise up against us to destroy us. The actual Hebrew is lechalotenu, meaning to annihilate us. And annihilate is a far stronger term than destroy. So one could ask if there is a respite between anti-Semitic attacks or anti-Semitic attacks, occasional eruptions from periods of respite. In a sense, they're exactly both. Anti-Semitism is there, it erupts and then subsides, but still bubbles under the surface. Therefore, we need to take it as a given that we are targets. Targets as a community, targets as institutions, and targets as individuals. We are targets on a continuum that starts with hate, move on to vilification, dehumanization, incitement, terror, and war. COVID-19 has become the new platform for modern blood libels the Jews experienced from the Middle Ages and on. Our generation is evidencing the exact same experience as our forefathers. The claim is that Jews cause it and Jews do it to profit from the troubles of others. These days, it is not only Jews who are subject to attacks, it is also police officers. For example, on March 23rd, the FBI released a statement that racist extremist groups, including neo-Nazis and other white supremacists, are encouraging members who contracted COVID-19 to spread the contagion to cops and Jews. In April, Al-Qaeda and Islamic State claimed that the virus is an act of God against enemies of Islam, and the pandemic is a hoax, a crisis that is being orchestrated by Jews or China. The online messages of right-wing or jihadi terrorist organizations about COVID-19 to incite hate and the call for attacks are finding receptive audiences. The good news, the likelihood of such attacks is not high, particularly as long as we are having shelter in place. And the likelihood of success is even lower. The bad news, it adds an element of bioterrorism that we can certainly do without. So what to do? That's what you asked me. First, I would suggest apply these principles of community policing. Number one, be knowledgeable. Information is power. But do not rely on social media and not even on mass media conspiracy claims. Check the veracity of the information. the daily dose of news can confuse even experts. And then do not rush to forward information that you receive without carefully checking its validity. Be proactive. Don't wait for things to happen. Gain a locus of control. Develop partnerships. Do that with surrounding communities, with other vulnerable minorities who are targeted. Help co-produce public safety. Work with faith groups, work with churches, mosques, and with various civic organizations. And finally, and probably this is the most important element that you can do, support your local law enforcement.
Thank you very much. Well, that's the end of my questions. Marcia, do you have some questions for Robbie, for Dr. Friedman?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Dr. Friedman and Dr. Gutman, for a very interesting and informative discussion. We do have a few questions. The first one is, what do you think is the biggest misconception about the Gili program, and how can this misconception be addressed?
Well, it's an interesting phraseology of the question. And the assumption that there is a misconception or misperception is literally a naive one. And I would like to flip it and suggest that there isn't a misconception. The misconception is created on purpose, because people who know what Gili is about and appreciate what they do don't have any misconception about police training. People who don't like police and people who don't like Israel create the misconception on purpose. And I will say that those who propagate this kind of technique of the big lie do it under the guise of research. And you've seen that in Durham. I would tell you that if that research paper would have been submitted to an undergraduate research methodology class, it would have failed miserably. They do not have data, they do not have facts, they do not have information, and what they do is they twist it. And I'll give you an example. This twisting is sophisticated. I'll give you one example. In the so-called report about the so-called deadly exchange, they say that the camera system downtown Atlanta was inspired by the Israel police. If they would have stopped at that, I would have passed that grade. They would have passed that course. But they went on to suggest that that goes to prove how oppressive techniques used by the Israel police are then used by the Atlanta police to oppress minorities. You heard me in response to your question, suggesting very clearly that we're very proud of having police learning from police. Cameras in public spaces are not a threat to the public. I'm not talking about cameras the way they use them in China with information that will not pass in free and democratic societies. But the camera system that is used to save lives, document criminal incidents in court, and submit them for trials, there's nothing wrong with that. And it happens if people have complaints about cameras. Look at London, the most CCTV city anywhere in the world. And that city, I think, is in quite a democratic country.
Next question. Why do so many states not report these attack statistics to the federal government? And without doing this, are they not giving groups that commit these acts a pass?
By these acts, you're talking about anti-Semitic attacks?
I think that's what the questioner has in mind.
Well, there is an attempt to file complaints by victims of attacks. And the attacks vary from verbal attacks to intimidation, to actual incitement, and then to physical attacks, such as desecrating a synagogue or a Jewish community center or a house of a rabbi, and so on and so forth. The more flagrant attacks, namely the physical ones, those are typically reported to police and are investigated. The threats are perhaps less reported, but there are various civil society groups that do keep track on that, and the ADL is one of them. And other organizations that keep track on that. And as I mentioned in my remarks, the ADL publishes an annual report on anti-Semitic attacks. I think that the reporting is there, but probably not at the 100% level.
Okay, another question. Local law enforcement has very little, if any, understanding of jihad ideology and jihad terrorist activity inside the United States. Since local departments are the first to see activities in their jurisdictions, how do we motivate them to learn about this threat?
Well, that is a bit of a misperception. I don't think that's true anymore. It might have been true in the period preceding the September 11th in 2001, the atrocity in New York, for those who may not have remembered. I don't think that that's the case anymore. There's a two-way flow of communication between local police and state and federal police. They have various fusion centers in the states. They synthesize information that flows out from local police to the federal government and vice versa. It's not always a full two-way street, but it's no longer true that police are not aware of, it's not just jihadi attempts, it's the various, how shall I say it, the various groups that want to cause harm in society. So I want to emphasize again something that I said earlier in response to Bob's question, and I think this is important to understand. We in Western society, and by we, I'm using it generically to discuss media, we as citizens, politicians, and so on and so forth. And there are numerous examples. We treat terrorism on a continuum from the verbal part of it, which is what I call the word axis, all the way to the pyrotechnic part of it, which is the explosion. So typically when you have an attack that ends up in shooting, hand grenades, bombing, and so on, an airplane shot down, a hotel or restaurant exploding, that will immediately get the attention because that is the pyrotechnic element, the immediacy, the emergency, the first responders. That's reported. If you have somebody who says, I'm going to sabotage the Olympics and I'm going to sabotage the royal wedding, and this is one cleric in London who is, I think now may still serve prison time. It took quite a long time for the United Kingdom to put him in prison because the problem is that, and particularly it's true in the United States, very few prosecutors are going to take a case of incitement because usually the First Amendment protects a speech in terms of not violating the following elements. So if you don't violate the immediacy, the likelihood, and the specificity of the attack, then it's permitted speech. And most groups are doing it in such a way that very few prosecutors would be willing to take a case because they don't want to bring a case to court if they're not likely to win it. And that's partly why this is enabled. If you want to have an interesting contradiction, Nazi propaganda is not allowed. If I were to put a full stop in this sentence, Bob, which country do you think has that law?
You're going to have to tell me, Ravi.
Germany.
Of course.
Where is it allowed? In the United States. So Nazi propaganda is imported from the United States to Germany clandestinely. So, and I understand the debate in public that you don't want to have a slippery slope, that if you forbid this, then you put people on the ground and all of that stuff. But the point in response, maybe a too lengthy a response to the question, the point is that if you don't pay attention to the incitement, it will eventually lead to the pyrotechnical part of it. And that's why it's very important to at least follow up on incitement. And in this case, there are quite a number of civic organizations that try to pay attention to that. And they probably are ahead of the curve in terms of law enforcement on that, and rightfully so.
Next question. Is the COVID-19 situation affecting your program? And if so, how are you adapting?
Well, look, let's be humble. My program is a speck of dust when the entire world is coming to a standstill. I mean, I've never believed that I lived to a time when the entire world is coming to a standstill. I mean, that's amazing in itself. So yes, some of our operational programs have been postponed. And as soon as conditions permit, namely air travel, restaurants opening, ground transportation, programs will resume, and we have several in the pipeline. However, we haven't been sitting on our behind waiting for things to happen. We have been doing a few things. This, for example, is one of them. But we also gave an online course on investigating the dark crime, the dark web, the dark net. And it is actually dark crime, because when you think about human trafficking or trafficking in body parts, that's what you can do in the dark net, among other horrible things. And we'll offer that course again in June. I think I want to be optimistic, careful, but optimistic. I think we're just moving the goalposts. It's going to put a postponement, a delay, but not a stop.
Thank you. Could you talk a bit about the nature of the Gili exchange program in Israel? What actually happens? What is it, and what is it not?
Yes, I can definitely talk. This is the thing I love to do, so I can definitely talk about it. So the idea is that you don't simply sit in a classroom and you play the role of a professor in a university and you teach people just in an academic fashion. That is what Bob referred to earlier as the peer-to-peer on-site training. And it's not only in Israel. All of the 26 countries that we have been working with, we do these exchanges so that we send officers from the United States to another country, or officers from another country come to the United States. We step, walk, eat, smell, learn what the other police agencies do. So to be a bit more specific, we review the entire gamut of police operations, from recruitment to training, to standards of operation, to the existing laws, the enforcement of the law, the deployment of officers, communication, reward, promotion, the value of human rights and civil rights. Israel doesn't have a constitution, but it has constitution-like laws. By the way, the United States has a constitution. The UK doesn't have a constitution either. So, but nonetheless, the rule of law is particularly important, and we pay a great deal of attention to that. So in addition, we do that on the move. So we are not just sitting in a classroom, but we go from base to base, from police station to police station, and we manage to see the country. We also visit important institutions of the country. So for example, we go to the Supreme Court, and we're briefed on Supreme Court. We actually were the first foreign delegation to visit the Supreme Court when it was established in the new building, not when the Supreme Court was established, but entered the new building. We go to the Knesset. We also make a point to stop at Yad Vashem. And the reason I want them to see Yad Vashem is because, not because of the sadness and the horrible part of the Holocaust. You can see that in any Holocaust museum in any city or in Washington, D.C. But there are 3 stops that I want to make that have relevance to police. And I think that you see that only in Yad Vashem in Israel. One is when you see the heads of the different guilds submitting the oath of loyalty to Hitler, which shows that it was an institutional support for what he did. It was not just a crazy man out there. A second stop is where you see a Gestapo man and a German police officer patrolling the street together with a German shepherd dog. And the third one is a site that has all of the participants in the Wannsee conference, the one that planned the real final solution, unfortunately. And I want to stop there to show that half of the 14 or so high-ranking officers of the Third Reich who were sitting at that table have doctorate degrees. They have law degrees or had law degrees. So we're not talking here about some mob behavior that, you know, some uneducated people went up. Germany was the cradle of democracy, and it's very important to understand that if you, as a police officer, lend a hand to that kind of behavior, you're reinforcing the violation of law. And to me, that's a very important lesson. And then in addition, it's the whole communication with your peers, learning how to do things. We have some amazing relationship with the crime lab in Israel, with the bomb disposal unit. And it's really a two-way street. And by the way, it happens when foreign delegations come over here, and I'll just give one example. In one of the police departments over here, we go into a building, and above the door, there was a sign. Under this sign, walk the best police officers in the United States. Now, you can imagine that if every police station has it, then all of the officers are the best officers in the United States. That's not the point. The point is that a year later, when I took the next delegation to Israel, I saw that sign in Hebrew in an Israeli police station. And what that tells me is that they internalized the value of promoting the morale of the police officers by treating them as the best that they had.
Thank you. What is the greatest challenge that your organization faces today, and how are you addressing it? The first one, the immediate one, is to get over this COVID-19 situation, and we will do it carefully, respectfully. We don't want to put anyone at risk. We have several countries that are waiting in line, and as soon as we can, we'll make that happen. I think number two is, other than regular operations that for us, I wouldn't even call it a challenge because we're used to it. The biggest issue is financial support. We are not funded by the university. All of our funds come from private sources. So it is a challenge. And we've been doing it for 28 years. Hope we can do it for another 28 years if we have enough support. How do you promote the Gilly program to police departments in various cities? And since you're based in Georgia, do you work with other states?
Yes, we go through the internal police channels. They get word on the program. It's a competitive process. Those interested need to apply. We have a selection committee that looks at the applications, and it is very picky. Some people, it takes a while before they get in. I'm sorry, you asked, yes, we are based in Georgia, but as I mentioned, we work with 29 different countries and states, I'm sorry, and we welcome, and we have graduates from Florida, New York, Texas, California, Minnesota, state of Washington, Washington, D.C., Texas, you name it. So more than half of the states.
Do you think that Jewish synagogues and communities should have an internal professional defense group to show BDS supporters and anti-Semitic groups that Jews cannot be harassed or harmed? And if so, what kind of training would you suggest?
The short answer is yes, but I want to add a word of caution. Depending on how do you define a defense group, I want to be careful not to advise to have a vigilante group because I think it's very dangerous. I would even be very careful and probably not advise to have people carry arms into a synagogue. And this is not because I'm against carrying arms, it's because the danger is that if somebody uses arms in synagogue and somebody else doesn't know that he's about to use it and he wants to do all the best things that he intends to do, he can harm participants. So if you're talking about a defense group, yes, but it has to be done in consultation with security experts, and the Secure Community Network is the one to deal with. I would not go into, we don't need to prove anything to anyone, not to the BDS and not to anybody else. What we need to do is assure and ascertain that we conduct our business in a way that makes us safer and healthier for the long term. And it's not an easy task to do, but I will say the following. A lot of synagogues have what is known as rent-a-cop. You have a police officer that is being paid a few extra bucks for 2 or 3 hours to be there. I'm not opposed to it, but I think that that is dismally not enough. And the reason I'm saying this is because that police officer will come there, 1, maybe 2 people. There's a fairly strong limit to the capabilities of that officer to protect a synagogue of, say, 100 people. Let's assume that you have 500 or 1,000, it becomes a much more difficult task. But let's go back to the principles of community policing for a second. I think the principle here is the co-production of public safety. And that's why I suggested work with your local law enforcement agencies, 1 or 2 or more, state, federal. They will help you to do a security assessment if you don't have a security director or if the federation doesn't have one. And make sure that everybody in the community is aware of it. It's by the same token that if you want to control crime, you do an epidemiology of the community, you do the same for protecting the community. That's what I meant by people needing to be proactive. Don't wait for things to happen. If there's something in your neighborhood that is suspicious, report it to somebody who should know what to do with it, or report it to the police, or report it to the facility synagogue, or what have you. What's important is to move from a passive, reactive to a proactive position. If there's one secret to this, this is it.
Given that campuses, including Georgia State and Tufts, are increasingly breeding grounds for campaigns like the Deadly Exchange, what, if anything, are you doing to educate students directly about the actual activities and purposes of your program?
Take a long breath. Well, our program is actually directed towards police officers and police leaders, but it's very important to educate the campus as well. So for example, last year and the year before, when the Student Government Association wanted to vote on a bill to shut us down, we were asked to testify to the student body. And we did. We provided facts. Based on the facts, the student government itself recommended to do away with the bill because we are not funded by the university, so demanding that the university stop funding us is actually quite stupid. Now, They are becoming a bit more sophisticated, but yes, we're trying to be available for students to educate them. We're trying to tell them what it is that we do. We're happy to talk to anyone. I've talked to a BDSer on campus and gave him complete information about Gili, and yet he still purposefully misrepresented what I said that we're still funded by the university, and then had the audacity to go to my dean and try to find out if what I'm telling him is true or not. The good news about Tufts and about Georgia State is that the university is supportive of what we do. Tufts is supportive of their students and is not happy about the decision that they made about the award to a BDS group. And I think we are seeing more of that. I think that the likelihood of these things to continue is high simply because it's on the agenda of the BDS. But look, on April, I can't remember the date, but I think it was April 12, Gili received the Carl V. Patton President's Award for Excellence in the university. This is not a favor. This is not a giveaway. This is a competitive award, and we got it in recognition of what we have done. So what case does the BDS have to say, no, we don't want you in the university? And they do this, interesting, this is what is the anti-Semitic part of it. They do it only against Israel. I mean, they don't do it against China, they don't do it against Turkey. So interestingly enough, in the second bill that they tried to submit, they said that Gili is working with some horrible countries, and they mentioned China and Hungary and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that they're horrible, they say that they're horrible. But they do it only against Gili as an international program, or a program that has international aspects. They don't do it with any of the other programs, and 2/3 of Georgia State University programs are with countries that are not exactly democratic. China and Turkey are two of them. So I think that for the long term, I still have a naive belief in democracy, in science, and in truth. The truth shall prevail. And in this case, it doesn't stand on the side of the BDS.
Thank you very much. That concludes our program for today. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I especially want to thank Dr. Friedman and Dr. Gutman for giving us so much information about the value of Gili and the importance of community policing. Everyone attending will receive a link of a recording of this program. And I encourage you to watch the Voice for Israel newsletter so you can get information about upcoming Zoom webinars and podcasts that we'll be doing. I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future time. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.